Hello and welcome back to another production of Daily Beacon Podcast. I'm Caleb Jarrow, sports editor here at the Daily Beacon. Joining me today is Jacob from the Daily Gamecock. Tennessee and South Carolina face off on Saturday. Jacob, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about some of the stuff y'all have going on down in Columbia?
Yeah, I'm Jacob Phillips. I'm the sports editor at the Daily Gamecock, the student newspaper here at the University of South Carolina. And so far this football season, it's been up and down for the Gamecocks. Obviously, that week one start against North Carolina, not the way they wanted to come out and start the year, but they had a nice bounce back game against Furman, went into Athens and played a heck of a lot closer than anyone thought they would, led Georgia at halftime, so that was nice. And then obviously they picked up a big win against Mississippi State this past week, and I think there's a lot of excitement going around right now.
Yeah, Jacob, and you kind of touched on it a little bit there. How would you what would you say about the South Carolina team through four games? What did you learn? What is there still be determined? And kind of what do you think the outlook for this team is right now?
Yeah, so coming into the season, there were a lot of question marks around the South Carolina team. A lot of players left in the transfer portal and the draft. They had to completely revamp their tight end room. They had to experiment a lot around the running back position. And you can kind of still see some of that progress, especially in that running back room. This past week, incoming transfer Mario Anderson got his first real opportunity to show what he can do. And, he looked pretty good. He got more carries than he had all season. I think coming into the week, he only had about six total carries for the season, and he almost tripled that in that game against Mississippi State. So they may have found something there. They struggled with the run game to start this season. It's been pretty bad. Against UNC, they had -2 total rush yards, so not how you want to start on the ground. On the more positive side, though, Spencer Rattler has looked really, really good this season. He's completing almost 75% of his passes. And even without Juice Wells out there for most of the season, he's still kind of been able to make a connection with Xavier Legette, who's just had monster performances this year, especially this past week against Mississippi State.
Yeah, and you talked about it a little bit again, but Juice Wells is obviously a pretty big loss. He had torched Tennessee last season with Spencer Rattler, part of the six touchdown performance last season in Columbia. How do you think? Obviously, they played without him last week, but how do you think that affects this offense coming into Neyland in a hostile environment, like for a team that really hasn't beaten a top 25 team yet?
Yeah, I think it really limits what they can do offensively. The strategy right now has kind of been get the ball to Xavier Legette kind of any way you can. He has almost double the receptions of the next closest person on the team. So obviously, without Juice out there, that kind of gives you one less weapon. Fortunately, some other guys have stepped up. I mentioned we had to revamp our tight end room. Trey Knox coming from Arkansas, he's looked pretty good this year. Uh, Luke Doty, our backup quarterback, has taken snaps at receiver and has been able to make plays for the team. So as far as, Juice Wells' absence, obviously, you want a guy like that. He was, first team All SEC last year, so that's a big hole you have to fill, but fortunately, guys, especially Xavier Legette, have kind of been stepping up and taking over that load for him.
And luckily, the Gamecocks still have Spencer Rattler under center, who, like I mentioned earlier, torched Tennessee last year in Columbia and kind of led them to that win. What have you seen from Rattler so far, and kind of how has his performance taken a step from last season to this year?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is that he just looks as confident as ever. I mentioned in week 1 that, they looked pretty bad coming out. That offensive line could not block anything that day, and you saw the effect on Rattler, but he still played a clean game in that week 1. No turnovers. He got sacked a couple times, but it wasn't really on him. Like I said, it was more of that line not holding. And then when he has had time, pretty much every week since then, with a little bit of an exception in Georgia, because obviously Georgia's front is pretty strong. But he's looked good. He's had time back there. He's composed. He's completing his passes, like I mentioned. He's hitting at about a 75% rate. And there are a lot of long balls, usually to Xavier Legette, but they're accurate balls too. He's not turning the ball over, which was a bigger concern at the beginning of last season with him. And I know at Oklahoma he had some turnover issues. So, really, this is probably the best we've seen Spencer Rattler look maybe ever, and I think a large part of it has to do with his, comfort in this new system under Dow Loggins. And just the way Xavier Legette is playing, him and Spencer's connection has just been really good this year.
More importantly, with Spencer Rattler, you have a veteran at the quarterback position who's been in SEC stadiums on the road. How do you think that'll help South Carolina succeed in Neyland Stadium, which I think Josh Heupel said it today that the players might not be looking back at last year for inspiration, but fans definitely are, and that stadium will be packed on Saturday night. So, how do you think Rattler's leadership and kind of his poise at the position will help them on Saturday night?
Yeah, I think this team knows they're heading into a hostile environment here this upcoming weekend. Obviously, last year's win was huge for us, and having a guy like Spencer under center, who we've mentioned is composed, he's confident, he can really elevate the team. They've had their struggles last season. They struggled on the road. That game against Florida comes to mind. That was a horrible game for South Carolina. Uh, and then the next week was the week they beat Tennessee, I'm pretty sure. So as you can see, this team has moments where they can look really bad. For example, this week, week number one in North Carolina. But then you have experienced players like Spencer who can kind of group the guys together and say, hey, we're better than this. We have more talent than this, because they do. They have the talent to win games. And Spencer Rattler is a big part of bringing them together and uplifting that entire offense, especially that line. He was a big part in just telling them after that week one, hey, we got it. We're so confident in you guys. We know we're going to get it right. And they've been progressing towards getting it right since then.
I feel like we've talked about Spencer Rattler enough, and Tennessee fans obviously will remember who he is from last year. Let's swing over to the defensive side, Jacob. Who are some guys that Tennessee fans like need to pay attention to on Saturday night? Who are some guys that the commentators will be calling their name a lot?
Yeah, I think on defense, especially Debo Williams is a guy that you're going to hear a lot of. He leads the team in tackles this year. He's been real disruptive there from the linebacker position. A big weakness for this team on defense the past couple years has been stopping the run, and they've given up a lot of yards this season. But what this team is really good at is forcing turnovers and getting opponents off the field, even if they do gain yardage. And so I think defensively as a whole, you're going to look for the whole unit to try to do that. Another person who I would look at is TJ Saunders. He's playing defensive tackle. He stepped into that role and he's leading the team on sacks right now. I believe he has three so far this year. And he's just another force out there. He's getting to the quarterback, forcing these QB hurries, hitting running backs behind the line of scrimmage for tackles for loss. So those are a couple people. Obviously, you have a lot of young guys in the secondary. Um, our defensive backs from last year got drafted, so we have sophomores stepping into roles this year who have some experience last year filling in for injured guys, but they're still trying to get used to playing that starting role full time. And I think we saw a little bit of that in that Mississippi State game because Will Rogers was able to pretty successfully throw the ball down the field against this Gamecock defense. And had it not been for their ability to, get that interception against him, who knows how that game could have turned out.
Yeah, I think that game was kind of a Shane Beamer joked about it after the game that he thought Josh Heupel was watching because of how poorly they defended against Will Rogers and that passing attack. You're in the press conferences every day down in Columbia. What has been the kind of mantra that this team is taking in the Neyland Stadium about that passing attack and even the run game this year? Tennessee is in the top of the SEC and even nationally with their running backs right now. What has kind of been the game plan? What are coaches and players saying about stopping Tennessee's offense on Saturday?
Yeah, as far as game plan goes, I think this past week, especially, the game plan was to stop the run, and they did a pretty good job at that against Mississippi State. And so the message since then has just kind of been find that balance. Shane Beamer in the press conference against Mississippi State said that he was embarrassed with how successful they were in the passing game. And so the message going in is kind of let's stop them all around because they think they have the talent to do that. And I agree. They do have the talent defensively to be very disruptive at all phases. And so it's just about taking that step up, especially against the passing game. And Tennessee's offense, a little bit better than what they played against last week against Mississippi State. So they're facing a bigger test. It's another ranked opponent that they're going against. And their two wins have come against non-ranked teams, and their two losses have come against ranked opponents. So where is this team skill wise? Can they compete with these ranked teams? So far, they haven't really proved that. and a big part of proving that is going to be their performance defensively come this next weekend.
Yeah, and like you said, South Carolina's 2-2 right now. Lost to their only two ranked opponents, and then beat two unranked teams. Coming into Saturday, how important do you think this game is for South Carolina? Because on the Tennessee side, it feels like if they lose this game, the season can go haywire very quickly. Or if Tennessee wins this game, they're still in the fight for the SEC East. So, from the South Carolina perspective, how important or how much does this game mean for the Gamecocks?
Yeah, I think this game will kind of determine what the rest of their season is going to look like. A loss here would put them at 3 losses. Um, they still have a good, tough bit of schedule coming up. It's obviously not as tough as it looked at the beginning of the season with how Clemson has looked this year, but there's still good opponents coming up, and so they need any win they can get if they want to get that bowl eligibility at 6 wins. And a loss against Tennessee makes that pretty tougher. Um, they're probably going to be an underdog coming in against Tennessee, and even if they lose this game, they can still put up a good season and maybe reach 8 wins by the end of it. But if they want to hit that ceiling, they needed to win either against UNC, Georgia, or Tennessee. They wouldn't be able to go 0-3 in those games and hit that ceiling that they can hit with the talent they have. But it's just a matter, can they play up to that talent? They needed to beat one of those 3 teams. They're 0-2 so far, so this game against Tennessee will determine if they can play up to that level that they can.
Yeah, and I think the spread already has South Carolina as an underdog, and it's kind of all over the place right now. But I'm sure it'll land somewhere around 10ish. I think it opened super high at like 12 or 13 in favor of Tennessee.
Mhm.
What are some keys for South Carolina coming into this game? How can South Carolina, I guess, pull up an upset that they weren't able to pull off against Georgia or North Carolina in week one?
Yeah, obviously, starting on the defense side of the ball, they need to just limit how many yards their opponents get. Obviously, you can't rely on forcing a team to make a mistake in your territory every single game because that's just not going to happen. Like, as good as a defense can be, you can't force a turnover every possession. So they need to limit Tennessee from just moving the ball down the field. They also need to establish that run game like they did this past week against Mississippi State. I'm hoping Mario Anderson continues to get touches. He has kind of shown that he should be the lead back over DK Joyner, who, we love DK around here, but he just kind of hasn't gotten it done from that RB position. He's made the wrong cuts at times. The blocking just hasn't been great. And when the blocking's not that great, you kind of need a back who can force his way through there and find holes. And DK hasn't been able to do that, but Mario showed good signs of that on Saturday. So they need to continue that run game. And then obviously it's going to come down to Spencer Rattler and what he can do. That's how they won it last year. That's how they're going to need to win it this year. They need a big game from their lead man, and hopefully he can put it together. I don't know if Juice will be playing, but if he's not, you also look at Xavier Legette to keep doing what he's doing. And I don't see a reason why those two can't connect. It's just, can everyone around them do the minimum of what they need to do?
All right, Jacob, as we wrap up, what is your score prediction for Saturday? I think I said South Carolina is going to win 45-38. Twitter stat for you: Josh Heupel is 0-9 when they score less than 30. So what is your guess for Saturday?
Yeah, this is a tough one because it's a big game for both teams. There's no denying that. I think on paper, Tennessee has more talent than South Carolina. I think they should be the favorite to win this game. But I don't know, something about this USC team this year, Spencer Rattler, the way he's been playing, I think I could see them going in there and taking it maybe 35-28 Gamecocks.
Awesome. Jacob, I appreciate you talking to me today. Why don't you plug everything y'all are doing at the Daily Gamecock and where people can find you?
Yeah, you can read all of our content, dailygamecock.com. We post articles every day of the week. We cover not just football, but all the sports here at the University of South Carolina. So if you're interested in reading any of that, just go to dailygamecock.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob R. Phillips 2. I post updates about the team, and I also cover high school sports in this area. So I post updates about that too.
Awesome. Jacob, I appreciate it. For Jacob, I'm Caleb, and this has been another Daily Beacon Sports podcast production.